Thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Gundry. I'm really so honored. They're able to set aside the time means a lot. And you
Great
just
to see
some
you again.
background, you guys. Yeah, no, it's great. And just some background, you guys. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Gundry about a year ago. We were in Arizona at Revitalize with My Body Brain, and that was the first time we really got a chance to connect. And there's so many things that I love about what you do, Dr. Gundry, and I'll let you get into everything with everybody, but I just want to give people a quick bio and some background on you. So Dr. Gundry, he is one of the world's most renowned heart surgeons, and he's a pioneer in nutrition as well as the medical director at the International Heart and Lung Institute Center for Restorative Medicine, and there's one in Palm Springs as well as Santa Barbara. So even though he had been practicing traditional medicine and he's been this incredible surgeon, 20 years ago, he decided he wanted to prevent health issues. He wanted to prevent patients from even having to get sick at all. So he retired as a cardiologist to teach patients how to eat and how to guide them to sort of get ahead of the problem, instead of coming in to fix it after the fact. So he spent the last 16 years studying the microbiome and how he can help patients use diet and nutrition as the key form of treatment. So he's since authored several New York Times bestselling books, including The Plant Paradox, as I had mentioned, The Plant Paradox Cookbook, and also The Longevity Paradox, which is, he titles it How to Die Young at a Ripe Old Age, which I haven't read yet, but I need to read that one. So, and he's the founder of this incredible line of different wellness products and supplements. So we're honored that you're here to spend some time with us today, Dr. Gundry. And everybody knows that we're here to talk about, gut health, gut-brain health. What is leaky brain? And what does this all mean? And how does your gut, and I talk about this a lot, as you probably know, and I have a very holistic approach. I love that you are very much about preventative care because that is the core of what I do and teach as a nutritionist and chef. And so people want to know, what is leaky brain? How does the gut affect the brain in that way? And I just think you're one of the best people to talk to about that. So please.
All right. So yeah, there is such a thing as leaky brain, and we can actually measure it on blood tests. I wouldn't have believed that, you could possibly have leaky brain, because one of the things that distinguishes the brain is what we call the blood-brain barrier.
Mm-hmm.
And normally this is literally a firewall between anything in your bloodstream and the brain. And just so that everybody understands, it's such an incredible firewall that if you, say, had a brain cancer, a tumor in your brain,
Mm-hmm.
we actually could put all the chemotherapy in the world in your veins, and it would actually never get into your brain because of this incredible firewall. And we would actually have to put chemotherapy direct into your spinal fluid and get it up into your brain that way. Mm-hmm. So we're taught that it's impossible to have leaky brain, but the channels that kind of protect your brain, that make the blood-brain barrier, are, if you will, manned by the bodyguards of the neurons in the brain called the glial cells, or microglial cells. And this is actually the immune system of your brain. And they're just an evolved part of the rest of our immune system, but they're dedicated to kind of protecting neurons at all costs. Mm-hmm. And with each passing year, we're beginning to realize that if these glial cells sense inflammation, and we'll get into how they sense inflammation, one of the first things they do is kind of open the gates to the brain. Mm-hmm. And nobody's quite sure why this is happening. My personal theory is they want to call in reinforcements and get more immune cells into the brain, but there's other theories. In any event, there's other ways to get leaky brain. And one of the more interesting ways is certainly in my research and Dr. Dale Bredesen's research and Dr. Amen's research is that if you have leaky gut, there's a pretty good chance that you can develop leaky brain. And just to really whet everybody's appetite, there's recently been discovered a class of lectins, one of my favorite subjects,
Yes.
that I was actually unaware of, called aquaporins. And you'll see that more and more. So aquaporins, plants actually breathe. They have little pores in their leaves, so they can exchange carbon dioxide in and out. They can actually get water vapor in and out. And these pores are controlled almost, for lack of a better word, by a little muscular aperture that opens and closes. And the thing that controls these little apertures are called aquaporins.
Okay.
And it turns out they are a lectin. And we have aquaporins in us. We have them lining our gut wall. And it turns out that a lot of the control of water movement in and out through your gut is actually controlled by aquaporins. And so if you've got loose bowels or diarrhea, you can thank aquaporins for putting more water into your gut. Okay, so you have aquaporins in the blood-brain barrier that control the movement of water in and out of the brain. All right, here's where it gets really nerdy.
I love nerdy.
All right, plant aquaporins look remarkably similar to our aquaporins. They're very similar structures, but they're not quite the same. So in some of us, particularly when our immune system is activated, if we eat plant aquaporins, we make an antibody to our own aquaporins, and we begin attacking our aquaporin system. So we've seen a number of, particularly women, it's rare that I see it in men, who have brain fog, who have gut issues like irritable bowel. And when we measure autoimmune attack on their aquaporins in their brain, they have markers of leaky brain. Now, the good news is when we seal their gut, and quite frankly, you know, my program's pretty doggone good at doing it, and I've published our results, then we see that the attack on their brain lining goes away. It resolves. And, you know, that's pretty exciting.
It's very exciting, yes.
You want a recent example of a man?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, our audience is 35% men, and they have questions. So,
all right. Well, hi guys. So, you know, about 70% of my practice is autoimmune diseases, and so I saw this young man. He's actually in his late 30s. He's a mover and shaker, a hard charger, and he's married, and he came to me with brain fog. He realized, you know, he's got to be at the top of his game and things aren't clicking very well. So we get all these tests on him, and he's got phenomenally awful leaky gut, which he didn't know he had. And he's got leaky brain, and he's got several other antibodies making it through his blood-brain barrier and attacking his neurons. And so his wife, bless her heart, says, okay, we're all in. We're going to do, you know, the Plant Paradox program. And he said, don't be ridiculous. I can't do that. It's too hard. And she said, you know, honey, you're young. We got a young kid. You know, look at your brain's under attack. I'll tell you what, I'm going to make all your meals for you, even when you go to the office, even when you're on the road. I'm going to make your meals for you. and we're going to do this, and we'll see you in 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
So they come in
Wow.
for their next test,
Okay.
and he says, I got to tell you, for the first 6 weeks, you know, I hated you. I hated your guts. I hated you. You're the most evil man I've ever met. But my wife, you know, after 6 weeks, you know, I started to kind of tolerate you because my wife was cooking for me. He says, now, you know, I'm beginning to like you. So we pull out his new labs,
Uh-huh.
and all of his markers of leaky gut are gone.
Yes.
But the best part is his leaky brain is gone.
Wow.
And the attack, his autoimmune attack on his brain is gone. The markers aren't there. So his wife is sitting right next to him, and she takes his fist. I hope people can see me. And she just smacks him right on the shoulder. And she said, "Just see." And he said, "Okay, you're right. You're right. Okay, you know, you were right."
Oh my God, that's too funny.
So yeah, true recent story.
That is
So,
pretty
you know,
funny.
and if I hadn't been able to, you know, see this through the years and measure these things, I would really think that so much of this is, you know, pseudoscience and voodoo and witchcraft
Right.
and placebo effect.
Mm-hmm.
But it's absolutely not.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you one more example,
Yeah, let's hear
which I
it.
wrote about in the Plant Paradox, which is, I think, unfortunately, it really describes what's going on in the regular medical profession.
Yeah.
I was referred a young college student out of Wisconsin who had Crohn's disease. And she was referred by a patient who was her sponsor fellowship to go to college because she was interested in immunology. And she was taken care of by a gastroenterologist from the Mayo Clinic, prestigious place, lectured there many times. And she went on my program, and within a couple days of starting it, she had the first normal bowel movement in her life. And
Wow.
she's, you know, she does this for about a month. She's having normal bowel movements. She calls up her professor at the Mayo Clinic. She said, I got to tell you, you know, I'm cured of Crohn's. You know, I don't have it anymore. And he says, well, you know, what are you doing? And she said, well, you know, I'm on this program, the Plant Paradox program. Is, you know, it's a diet. And he said, food has nothing to do with Crohn's. This is genetic. And this is a placebo effect. You know, the guy, you know, has just convinced you that you don't have Crohn's. And so she was so upset after she got off the phone. Her mother was making Christmas cookies. And so she went in and she had 2 Christmas cookies. And she said, within about 2 hours, you know, I had the worst cramps. I started later that day, have bloody diarrhea. And she said, you know, placebo effect, you know, there's my bloody diarrhea. And so she's looking at me on FaceTime, and she said, why, I don't get it. You know, why doesn't my doctor understand this? And, you know, I've said it before, if your eyes aren't open, you can't see.
100%.
And one of the best things that ever happened to me that I've written about is when Big Ed, who I met over 20 years ago now, basically cleaned out the blockages in his coronary arteries by food and supplements. Unless my eyes had been opened that this could possibly have happened with food and supplements, you know, I would have said, oh, you know, that had no effect. Your coronary arteries miraculously cleaned out. You know, it's a miracle. So there's a couple of great examples.
Those are great examples, and I love that you're sharing the examples. You know, you are an MD. You know, you are, and not that you're loved with these guys, but you are what people consider like that traditional doctor. You're not a naturopath. You're not a nutritionist. You know, and these are the examples you've had. These are your patients, and this is your philosophy, and I really love that because I personally have had to work with physicians who who echo that old theory, you know, that where they don't understand how food, you know, not that they, but they just don't believe, you know, that food and nutrition can have this profound effect on the body. And so, you know, working with someone like you, doctors like you, who actually understand is the best thing that we can do for patients and clients. So I'm so glad you shared those examples. People need to hear that, especially from you. So we have tons of questions. I know that there's a lot that you'd like to cover. I think that a couple of the things for the people that jumped on a little bit late, can you go over, you know, some of the symptoms that are common for people who have leaky gut, who have leaky brain, so that they know to either reach out to you or to at least go get a blood test, or what kind of test they can ask their physicians for to test for this? You know, what should they be looking out for?
Well, that brings up a good point, and I've actually written about this on Instagram. You have to, and this particularly goes to women, you have to find someone who is willing to listen to you and not dismiss you as, well, you've got 2 kids and of course you're tired, or
Yeah.
okay, you're working a job and you got 2 kids and of course you're tired, or you're 45 years old and you're perimenopausal and of course you're tired and of course you're depressed and that's normal, get over it. These things are not normal.
Right.
I mean, can you imagine the pioneers in the 1800s? I grew up in Omaha, Nebraska, where tons of the Mormons and other pioneers came through Nebraska in their covered wagons. And I mean, can you imagine trekking across America with 2 kids and, you know, cows trailing behind in a covered wagon and saying, boy, I don't want to go on because I'm having a really bad day and I'm tired. Of course not. These, you know, are symptoms of being tired, or I've got a foggy brain, or I just don't, you know, my get up and go got up and went. These are modern phenomena, and we did not have these problems before, and we have to realize that, number one. Number two, when I wrote The Plant Paradox, I wrote kind of a 2-page list of everything that I've seen that's associated with a leaky gut. And it's crazy. When I look at that list, you know, I'm going to say, okay, you just described just about every disease there is, or every complaint there is. And, you know, how can you be so sure? Well, because I've seen it with leaky gut. So there's very, very strong evidence, and Daniel Amen would back me up, that leaky gut and a gut dysbiosis, a bad gut microbiome, is probably one of the major unrecognized causes of anxiety and depression that there is. And there's some really good research that lectins are a really good cause of anxiety. So, and again, we didn't know about this because we had no way to measure this. We have to remember that the Human Microbiome Project was really only completed about 6 years ago. And before all that, I mean, we had no idea that there were 100 trillion different, you know, bacterial species living in our gut, and there's tens of thousands of them. And we had no idea that this was this incredibly complex ecosystem of, you know, like a tropical rainforest. And so
and that it can be affected by your environment too, you know.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just what you put into your body, it's also what you breathe and like what's around you. And so, you know, it is so complex.
We had no idea the effects of Roundup on any of us, because we've, you know, been assured that Roundup is harmless, so that it can't harm humans, because we don't have the shikimate pathway that Roundup is used to kill plants with. Unfortunately, what they didn't tell us was bacteria in our gut use the shikimate pathway. And they didn't tell us that Roundup in and of itself can produce leaky gut.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't tell us that Roundup's in everything.
Right.
And they didn't tell us that about 95% of women have Roundup in their breast milk. It's like, holy cow.
Right. Right. That's the issue, is that it's so easy. Most people probably have some degree, right,
Yeah.
of leaky gut. So, we've talked about brain fog, right? And clearly that, because of that blood barrier that gets leaked into, that this can affect mood disorders. We talked about depression, clearly there's fatigue, right? Anxiety and different disorders like that clearly can affect the hormones, right? So these are some of, I guess, and I know that there's other very common symptoms, but would you say that those are maybe like the top, or 5 or 6 that the average person who may be experiencing some level of leaky gut would be experiencing themselves?
Well, and sometimes it's even as simple as, I've got achy joints, and, I'm 30 years old, and, I feel like every time I get out of bed in the morning that, I feel like, an 80-year-old person. And what's the deal with that?
Right.
And I see a lot of people who, their hands were swollen or their feet were swollen, and that was actually all from leaky gut. And we always have to remind ourselves that the idea that disease comes from the gut is as old as the history of medicine. Hippocrates, 2,500 years ago, said all disease begins in the gut. And the guy was a genius. I mean, he didn't have the Human Microbiome Project, but he knew that this is where it was coming from.
Right.
We also forget that a little over 100 years ago, there was a movement in what was called auto-intoxication. And if you want to have some fun, Google auto-intoxication.
I'm going to write that down.
It was auto-intoxication. And it said that bacteria in our mouth and in our colon were the cause of these horrible humors, if you will, that was the cause of all disease. And it got so crazy at one point that people were having their colons removed surgically and all of their teeth pulled so that they would not have auto-intoxication. It was finally stopped literally in modern times in the 1940s. This was a fairly big practice. So people, and believe it or not, colonics came about because of auto-intoxication, that the idea was, oh my gosh, there's these toxins in our gut, and as long as we clean them out, we'll be fine.
Right.
Of course, sadly, that was the dumbest thing anybody could have done, but that's another subject.
Yeah. Well, I mean, people are still, there's a massive audience for this information because people, I think, are starting to understand, and people like you, thank goodness, are out there educating the community and the world about how important it is to be educated on this issue of the health of our gut, leaky gut, and leaky brain. So, there's been so many questions. Would it be okay if we just peppered in a few questions right now, and then I have some questions, and then we can kind of go back to some of the things I'd love for you to talk about. We have had questions that are like, probiotics, and that's something that there's a lot of back and forth, about probiotics. Are they helpful? Can you take too much? In particular, if you do have leaky gut.
Okay, so just so everybody knows, probiotics are, quote, friendly bacteria. Prebiotics are the sugars and fibers that bacteria like to eat. So it's the fertilizer, if you will. So most of the probiotics that people take actually never get past stomach acid. They're destroyed by stomach acid. So that doesn't mean that they don't have an effect, because there are some interesting papers that dead probiotics still have an effect. So that's number one. Number two, the vast majority of probiotics that are available for purchase are not part of our native flora. They're not part of our gut flora. And what's interesting is most of them go on a spa retreat in your gut for a couple weeks, and then they leave. And because it's not part of their flora. There are a couple of interesting papers that there may be a couple species of lactobacillus that can set up shop, but don't count on it. Let's put it that way. What I think is really exciting that I've written about in the longevity paradox is in the lining of our gut. The lining of our gut is the same surface area as a tennis court inside of us. And that surface area is so big because we basically have all these finger projections into our gut, which are called villi and microvilli. And so we essentially have a shag carpet inside of us. And that's why there's a tennis court inside of you. Everybody looks down and goes, there's no tennis court down there, I guarantee you. So at the base of these microvilli, I think you can see my fingers, they're called crypts, and like a crypt in a coffin. And at the base of these crypts are not only our stem cells for the gut, but also a collection of essential bacteria. And they literally kind of coexist in this little space where nobody can get to them. And what's exciting is that you can wipe out most of your microbiome with a course of antibiotics. There's no doubt about that. But if you give these guys what they need to grow, they will come out of hiding and start growing on the food. And that's actually, I think, really exciting. So I like probiotics as much as anybody. I have a probiotic that doesn't get eaten by bacteria, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's far more important to have prebiotics, number one, that can target the food needs of these probiotics. I use the example for my patients in Palm Springs. Let's call probiotics grass seed. And so I give my patients some grass seed because they want to grow a lawn. And they come back a month later and said, you sold me bad grass seed. And I said, why? They said, well, it didn't grow. And I said, well, what'd you do? And they said, well, we put it on the sand and walked away. And I said, well, did you fertilize it? There's no, did you water it? Well, no, you didn't tell me to. So it's like, okay, swallow all the probiotics you want, but you got to give these guys what they want to eat. You got to, and those are prebiotics. Now, you can take prebiotic fiber, which I think is important, or you can eat prebiotics. And I think that's equally as important. So the other thing that people make a mistake, if you want to be simplistic, there's bad bugs in your gut and good bugs in your gut, and they compete for food. And the bad bugs love simple sugars, and they love saturated fats, and they thrive on these. And in fact, they grab it before anybody else can have it. On the other hand, the good bugs actually don't do well on simple sugars and saturated fats, and they instead like, I hate the word, complex carbohydrates, fructooligosaccharides, other oligosaccharides, galactosaccharides. So these are very common in, for one thing, tubers. They're very common in the chicory family. What the heck is chicory? Well, radicchio is in almost every grocery store. Some people think it's a red Italian lettuce or something. It's part of the chicory family. Belgian endive is another example. Jerusalem artichokes is another great example. Artichokes, artichoke hearts.
Mm-hmm.
So give these guys what they want to eat. Take away the simple sugars and saturated fats, and it's amazing. You will, make a bunch of things happen.
Yes, and you'll be growing some of those good bacteria and feeding them good stuff. And I actually would love to sort of like dive into some more foods. You listed off several. Uh, I talk a lot about gut health as well with my community. And I've talked about the prebiotics and the probiotics and the different foods. Can you share, in your practice of so many decades, what are the foods, the primary foods that constantly, pop up amongst your patients as foods are culprits for leaky gut and leaky brain, and what have you recommended to them as very commonly found foods that can help resolve, and help support the healing process for leaky gut and leaky brain, because I know you've seen it all.
Well, one of the reasons it's called the plant paradox is their plants have a defense system against being eaten. They do not want to be eaten, believe it or not. And they don't want their seeds eaten. And a lot of them use multiple defenses, and one of those defenses is lectins. And just so that everybody knows what we're talking about, believe it or not, gluten happens to be a lectin. And that's why it's mischievous for so many people. But what I've found through the years is that the vast majority of people who go gluten-free may do better, but they don't get all the way back. And that's because most gluten-free foods are full of other lectins. For instance, about 70% of my patients who do react to gluten react to corn as if they were eating gluten. Their immune system cannot tell the difference between the two. We see a number of patients that react to the lectins in beans and legumes. And the good news for that is you can pressure cook beans and legumes and pretty much destroy the lectins in them. We see many people react to the lectins and the aquaporins in tomatoes and peppers and tomatoes, the nightshade family. And interestingly enough, not only are there, quote, regular lectins in the nightshades, but peppers, tomatoes, and potatoes also contain these aquaporins that can cause by themselves leaky brain. So, darn it.
Just those foods alone.
Yeah, so leave those alone. Also, peanuts are one of the highest lectin containing beans there are. Peanuts are not nuts. I'm sorry, cashews have some really nasty lectins.
I know.
I love them, but I don't eat them.
Yeah.
And quinoa, please get rid of quinoa. If you want a replacement for quinoa, please use. They don't have any lectins. And one of my favorite new grains is fonio, Fonio, which is in the millet family, and it doesn't have any lectins, so that's another great option. Mushrooms, have all the mushrooms you want. They're so good for you.
Those are actually, and I think it's so important that you highlighted some very commonly used nuts and grains, because people don't realize cashews, they're great. It's especially for all the plant-based community, all the vegans out there, and it's so important to be aware of.
My wife and I consider ourselves veg Aquarians. By that I mean during the week we tend to eat a vegan diet, and then on the weekends we in general eat a wild shellfish, add that to our diet, and occasionally wild fish. But so we think of ourselves as veg Aquarians. So I'm certainly not anti-plant. I am a confirmed plant predator. But I take care of a large number of vegans and vegetarians because of my experience at Loma Linda University, which is the only blue zone in North America. And some of, sadly, my sickest patients when I first meet them are modern vegans.
Mm.
And they're living on brown rice and beans, and their hair is falling out, and they're depressed and anxious. And when we look at their immune system, it is just flared with these plant compounds. So, and I remind people that 4 billion people use rice as their staple, but 4 billion people take the hull off of brown rice and eat it white, because the hulls have the lectins. And for 8,000 years, people have been taking the hull off of rice. 4 billion people can't be that stupid.
Right. I think my mom actually said that too. The whole brown rice, white rice thing, because she's, been eating white rice forever and thinks it's always the better choice. What are your thoughts, just out of curiosity, about, soaking some of if someone really does want to have, say, seeds, or beans and different legumes, should they, what are your thoughts on soaking them? Especially if, before cooking, if they pressure cook, but let's say they don't pressure cook. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so soaking is, a time-honored way of reducing lectins. And particularly in Italy, where they don't use pressure cooking very much, they soak their beans for 48 hours and change the water every 4 to 6 hours, throw that water out. And then they cook their beans a long time. Again, I go around the world studying how people kind of delectinize things, and that's certainly one of the things they do. Speaking of quinoa, I saw a feed on quinoa. The Incas actually soaked their quinoa and then they let it rot. They fermented it, because fermentation is another way of breaking down lectins.
Yes.
So, it's not on the package directions, folks.
Right.
Please ferment your quinoa before you eat this. The great news is, and that's why I wrote the Plant Paradox Family Cookbook, is a pressure cooker will destroy most lectins, but it won't destroy the lectins in wheat, barley, and rye, and it won't destroy the lectins in oats. And please do not make the mistake. If you see the word gluten-free oats, run the other way. Number one, there is a lectin in oats that cross-reacts with gluten. And number two, almost all oats in this country have glyphosate, even organic oats. So please put away your oat granola bars.
Just choose millet.
Yeah.
There's other
it works
choices.
Great. And if you want a real treat, get sorghum popcorn.
Those are so good.
Exactly
I love
like
sorghum.
popcorn. It smells like popcorn, but it doesn't have a hull.
Yeah. Sorghum is actually one of my favorite grains to work with. We have sorghum and millet, actually, what's in my dry pantry cupboard, and it's actually really fun to cook with because you can do so many different things with it.
I've got, anybody goes to my YouTube channel, I've got a millet Thanksgiving stuffing that just, it's fabulous.
Amazing.
It's fabulous.
Amazing. And that's the thing, you guys, we didn't talk that much about Dr. Gundry's books, but, I would say most of these questions, if we don't get through all of them right now, you're going to find a lot of answers in his books, in his book series, between the Plant Paradox, the Plant Paradox Cookbook, the one for the family, the Longevity Paradox. He's got so many resources, along with his website, along with his social platforms, where he, offers all of this information, and you can find the recipes and the different food choices. So, and that actually covered a bunch of the questions already in terms of food, and that's a great resource if they can find it. People want to know, what should they ask their physicians for if they want to go in and get tested for leaky gut? Because a couple people did actually say, my doctor didn't know what test I'm asking for. So what do we tell people to say when they walk into their doctor's office and they want to get tested for leaky gut or leaky brain?
Okay, that's actually a great question. So, Dr. Fasano from Johns Hopkins was, as far as I know, the person who figured out how lectin and gluten cause leaky gut. And one of the things that he discovered was that there's a compound that when gluten or lectin attaches to the wall of your gut is elaborated, and this compound is called zonulin. And so early on, we began looking for leaky gut by measuring zonulin in the blood. And unfortunately, we were wrong. And I made the mistake, and I think most people still make the mistake of looking for zonulin as a way of looking for leaky gut. What happens is that zonulin attaches to another receptor, and then that flips a switch and breaks what are called tight junctions. So rather than look for zonulin, you actually have to look for antibodies to zonulin, and you have to look for antibodies to actin, one of the pieces of the tight junction. And when you do that, lo and behold, the vast majority of people that I see, their zonulin levels are normal, but their anti-zonulins and their anti-actins are sky high. And then we watch that over the course of months turn off. And so ask for anti-zonulin and anti-actin. Now, there's a company that I use called Vibrant America. Yeah, I have no relationship with them, except I actually advise them on their lectin test. And they actually are the ones who taught me about aquaporins. They discovered so the tests are stupidly named. They're called Zoomers. I don't know who their marketing person is, but so there's a wheat Zoomer that looks for leaky gut from wheat. There's a corn Zoomer. There's a lectin Zoomer. There's an egg Zoomer. There's a dairy Zoomer, and there's a neuro Zoomer. And so that's what actually I use. I don't use it on everybody because sometimes it's, quite frankly, the vast majority of people, 94% of people who go on my program, in 6 months' time, their autoimmune disease is gone. So it's this small percentage where, you know, I'm going, okay, you're doing everything right. I believe you. You're not cheating. You're not having a little bite of sourdough bread, you know. Let's find out what else is going on. And then we really use this sophisticated set of tests. Okay, so most people, the reason this book, the program has been so wildly successful, and it's been translated in 36 foreign languages, is all you got to do is follow it. And for the vast majority of people, it works. That's what's so great about it.
That's fantastic. You know, I have, there's been several people that have said that they've got Hashimoto's and, you know, PCOS, and they've gone through, you know, dozens of doctors or nutritionists, and they've spent, you know, thousands of dollars in different supplements and whatever it is that they're recommending, and they're still not well, you know, and they're still having problems. Where would you tell them to start? Because I feel like this is, you know, this is the best place to start.
Well, and I see a large number of people with autoimmune diseases that have been, I don't know, 6 or 7 university centers, have been to naturopaths, and yes, they've spent a lot of money, and they've bought a lot of supplements, and they still have Hashimoto's or another autoimmune disease. And so here's my recommendations. Hashimoto's, like any other autoimmune disease, I believe and have published that it is from leaky gut. And if let me use the example. Let's suppose you and I are out on a lake or the ocean in a rowboat, and we develop a leak in the bottom of the boat. Now, we have 2 options. One is we can get a bucket and we can start bailing. And if the hole gets bigger, we're going to need to get a bigger bucket, and we're going to have to bail faster. This is the traditional system for leaky gut. Here, I want you to take 10 compounds, and these are guaranteed to seal your leaky gut. And quite frankly, that's a bucket. On the other hand, it's a lot easier to put your finger in the hole, and then you don't need the bucket. And if lectins are a major cause of causing that hole, and there's tremendous evidence, again, from Dr. Fasano that that's the cause, to me, it's a whole lot easier to remove lectin-containing foods from your diet, and then you won't have holes.
Right.
And I'll give you an example of a couple of months ago. A woman came to see us, and normally the way we're set up, my PA sees her first, and she did have really impressive markers of Hashimoto's. And we usually I see them either in 3 or 6 months, depending on my time and severity. So I introduce myself and I say, what are you here for? And she says, oh, well, I have Hashimoto's and that's why I'm here. And I said, no, you don't. And she said, what do you mean? You idiot. And of course, that's what I have. That's why I'm here. Well, I, of course, had seen her new labs. And after she'd been on the program, and her markers for antithyroids and antithyroglobulin were negative.
Wow.
And so I hold it up and I said, you don't have Hashimoto's. I said, you did, but you don't have it anymore. And she goes, what? That's impossible. I've had Hashimoto's for 10 years. That's impossible. I said, well, you don't have Hashimoto's. And, yeah. And so it's like, why do I do this? I still see patients every day of the week. I see patients on the weekends.
Wow.
And why do I do this? It's because, number one, somebody's got to do this. And number two, what better feeling can I have of, that look in that person's eye going, huh? I don't have it.
Yeah.
I'll give you another example today. I've got a 47-year-old woman who has Parkinson's disease. And, she's been everywhere. And everybody says, yeah, you got Parkinson's disease. Take your methyl dopa and, have a nice day. And she's going, so we saw her 6 months ago. And lo and behold, she had markers for lupus. And I got news for anybody who will listen. Parkinson's is an autoimmune disease. And we're finally beginning to realize that. So here she is. We've seen her now 3 times. This was the 3rd time. And her lupus markers were going down and down. And this time, her anti-nuclear antibody is turned off. It's off. It's gone. And, she's going, holy cow, but that's an autoimmune disease. It can't be gone. It's gone.
It's fantastic.
And, so
these are great shares. Thank you for sharing this. And there's so many people and they think that, okay, they've got this autoimmune disease. I get these all the time, these messages, especially on Instagram, and it's like what to do. It doesn't mean that you have to be on medication for the rest of your life. And it doesn't mean that you have to suffer, but it might mean that you need to remove certain things out of your diet for a certain period of time to allow your body to heal. And your guidelines are a place to start. So that's really, I think, it gives a lot of people very encouraging.
All I can say is, all the good foods, bad food lists are available on my website, drgundry.com or gundrymd.com. Tons of YouTube videos on this for free.
Yeah. You guys, you're such a wealth of information and you offer it out there for everyone. So you guys check out Dr. Gundry's site and his books and his YouTube. We had a lot of questions about, what was the replacement for quinoa? We talked about millet and sorghum. I know that sometimes the internet gets a little glitchy and we miss some of the incredibly valuable information that comes out, and but go on his site. He has lists, of foods, and I also offer a lot of information on my site as well. For those of you who already follow me, and check out the different types of foods that you want to avoid, take out of your diet, how to prepare foods that you do want to keep in your diet, the best way to do it, and
the other thing is, I have a weekly podcast, the Dr. Gundry Podcast, that you
yes.
can, And we invite people who you wouldn't even expect I would invite on. And we recently had Dr. Joel Furman, who was one of my biggest critics when my book came out.
Wow.
And I actually have a lot of respect for him, and I wanted him on the show. And we actually got him to admit that he pressure cooks his beans. And it's like,
oh
wow.
my God, that's so funny.
Why didn't you say so?
Well, that's great. That's so fantastic. And I'm so glad you brought that up. I nearly forgot to say it, is that you've also got that podcast, which is another incredible resource. So, Dr. Gundry, you've had everyone captivated. They've stayed on for, just about the whole hour. You're so amazing. Thank you for coming on. There's a couple more questions in my question box. I'm going to just take a peek. But for anyone who needs to jump off, Dr. Gundry, amazing. Thank you so much. I'll post all his information. You obviously can find him on Instagram and on his website, YouTube. Type in his name. Let me check out a couple of these questions since we have a few minutes left.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Glad to have you here.
Yes, and so many thank yous, Dr. Gundry. We have so many fans here just wanting to share how much you've helped them and how much they love you. So that's a lot. That's what's here as well. It says there are a couple people that says, what have we been following your program and we're not seeing results? Does that come up? That's actually a good question. Maybe there's a common mistake that people are making.
Yeah. So if you've got an autoimmune disease, I can tell you that sadly, you really can't cheat, not even a little. That's been one of the universal findings. Now, there are a few people that it's kind of stumped the stars. They're doing everything right, and I can't figure it out. So then when we do these really deep dive vibrant tests, we go, oh my gosh, you not only react to casein A1 in milk, but you react to casein A2 and you react to whey. Right. And so dairy's gone. Sorry. For most people, dairy is not gone. The few other people, it's eggs, either the white or the yolk or both. And, surprisingly, and I've said this, but don't want to have a panic, there is an aquaporin in spinach that some people react to. And some of my most mischievous patients are big time spinach eaters. And when we test them, they react to the aquaporin in spinach. So we take it away from them. There are other people who react to almond flour. That's why almonds are not on my approved list. They're not on my bad list either. But we know that I have a number of patients with rheumatoid arthritis. That almonds and almond flours are mischievous. I have a woman recently with Hashimoto's who she had turned off her Hashimoto's. She went on an almond flour kick. She just started baking cookies and everything with almond flour, turned her Hashimoto's back on, and it was the almond flour. So, yeah, it's not a perfect system, but again,
but it gives you that start, right? I mean, it gives you that start. And, it just might mean that you just have to dive in a little deeper. If you start the program and it's not working for you, dive a little deeper. There's so many layers, that maybe it just means you've got to peel back a couple more layers to figure out what other markers there are, what other inflammatory responses that you have to different things. So I thought that was a really good question. Don't give up hope. This works.
Yeah,
so
this is just detective work, and I actually love I love to change my mind about something. And, there are nutritionists who have not changed their stance in 30 years, despite the knowledge that we've acquired. David Perlmutter and I were talking on my podcast. He said, look, when I wrote Grain Brain, we didn't have the Human Microbiome Project.
Right.
The idea that now that we have it, I wouldn't change a lot of my thoughts based on that. It's like, he says, and yet there are people who, despite all this knowledge, still claim that, their way is the right way. And it's like, I mean, hopefully, remember, you gotta, you gotta keep questioning everything. Always.
Sure. Yeah.
The minute you think you have all the right answers, give up.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not true. It's not true.
Yeah, and I love that you say that because it's so true. Like, you never stop learning. You never stop learning, and it's great to always remember, keep your mind expanded. You never know what you're going to figure out. And we probably got 2 minutes left. One more question. Is this out of your life forever? So let's say you've done all this, you've healed the leaky gut. Your gut is now healed. Is it possible to introduce some of these things back into your life?
Great question. I just presented a paper at the American Heart
one.
Association Lifestyle and Epidemiology meeting on this subject. And it turns out that we now have 10 patients that I reported on that when we did, they were all gluten sensitive and had celiac, and they had not gotten rid of their celiac by being gluten-free, and we took them lectin-free. And then we found over a course of 9 months that not only had their leaky gut healed, but they no longer carried antibodies to gluten and the other parts of gluten in wheat. Now, I don't say that, okay, once we do this, you can start having wheat again. I'm not saying that. But it's actually, I think, encouraging to me that once we kind of get that barrier intact again, and once we get a healthy microbiome that can handle lectin, then our immune system may be able to recalibrate and not go crazy anymore.
Yeah, that's great.
So that's encouraging. Now, please don't hear me that, okay, once we seal your leaky gut, you can go have 12 pizzas and muffins. Please don't hear me say that.
No, that's definitely not what he's saying, you guys. He's saying that there's hope and there's always option and there's a lot of, good science.
And quick question, Candida.
Yes.
Just get rid of fruit and simple sugars and it will go away. You do not have to. I have never given anybody any of the antifungals. You don't need it. You have to give the guys that will get rid of them what they like to eat. Please get rid of fruit and simple sugars and it'll all go away. They will starve to death, I promise.
And again, it's one of those things. It doesn't necessarily mean forever, but take away what's feeding the bad guys. Give your body that chance to heal. So, Dr. Gundry, you are awesome. Thank you so much. This has been so informative for everyone. The comments just keep coming in. I still have questions coming in. This is so great to be here with you today. Thank you so much for making the time. We'll definitely share this with all your information once we get everything cleaned up. But we had almost 300 people on the full time. So thank you so much. It was awesome.
Great. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you. Great to see you. All right. Take care. Big hugs.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.